Okay, he's coming right now. Sorry for the delay. Here he is, Your Honor. Thank you, Congressman Swalwell. Just one moment while we get the tech set up. Okay. Good afternoon. Congressman, can you please introduce yourself?
I need to swear him in.
Oh, sorry. Oh.
I'm fumbling with the technology.
Well, and we have a siren again.
Congressman Swalwell, can you hear us?
Yes, Your Honor.
Great. Will you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear, under the penalty of law, that the testimony you will give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Congressman Swalwell. Could you please introduce yourself?
Good afternoon. My name is Eric Swalwell, and I represent the 14th Congressional District of California.
How long have you been a member of Congress?
Going on 11 years, elected in 2012 and sworn in on January 3, 2013.
We got it. Were you at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, 2021?
Yes, I was.
And what was supposed to happen in Congress that day?
We were sworn in 3 days earlier, and on the 6th was to be the day where the Congress votes to certify the electoral college votes that were sent from December after being ratified by the states.
I'm going to ask you some more questions about January 6, 2021, but first I'd like to ask you some questions about prior presidential elections. When, if ever, had you participated in Congress's counting of electoral votes for president before January 6, 2021?
I have also participated in the January 6, 2013 certification for the re-election of President Barack Obama. And I also participated on January 6, 2017 for the election of President Donald Trump.
And does Congress always count the votes on January 6th?
Yes, every 4 years on January 6th. Again, new Congress sworn in on the 3rd, and then on the 6th is when the certification occurs.
In your experience, what is the process for counting and certification of electoral votes on January 6th?
Largely ceremonial, in that the Congress convenes in what's called a joint session, meaning the House and the Senate are in the Congress. The Vice President of the United States, the President of the Senate, presides over the count, and each state alphabetically has their votes called. If there's an objection, you need somebody to meet your objection from the other chamber. So, for example, House member objects, a senator would also have to object, and then both bodies would go back to their chambers and debate the objection, and then come back for resuming the count.
And how are those objections resolved?
They're resolved through debate and then a vote.
And I think you testified about this, but what role does the vice president play in those proceedings generally?
As the president of the Senate, the vice president presides over the count. There are tellers who are seated just below the vice president from both chambers, both parties. They tally the counts that are sent from the states, and the vice president literally, kind of like an award show, opens up the count and reads how the state went for each individual thing.
In 2016, were there objections to the counting and certification of electoral votes from any state?
Do you mean in 2017?
Yes, I'm sorry, arising out of the 2016 election, so on January 6, 2017.
I do recall there was at least one, perhaps more Democratic House objections, but I also recall that there was no senator to sign off, so to speak, or co-sign on the objection, and so we never adjourned for debate.
And so what happened with those objections?
I remember Vice President Biden was in the chamber, and Vice President Biden asked if there was a senator who also objected. No senator objected, and the Vice President would open up the envelope or look at the votes sent from the state, and they would just alphabetically proceed to the next state.
And did you object to the counting or certification of any electoral votes?
Not in 2013 and not in 2017, no.
Do you recall any of the objectors in 2017, on January 6, 2017, suggesting that then Vice President Biden, as President of the Senate, could have rejected any of the electoral votes submitted by the states?
No, I do not recall that ever coming up in any caucus meetings or any public representations.
And what do you recall, if anything, about anyone suggesting that then Vice President Biden, as President of the Senate, could declare Hillary Clinton the winner of the 2016 election?
In my recollection, that was never discussed by any of my House colleagues.
Before late 2020 or early 2021, had you ever heard anyone suggest that the Vice President, as President of the Senate, had discretion to reject electoral votes from states?
I would not hear that line of argument until after the 2020 election from the former President Donald Trump and his team.
And did then Vice President Biden try to do any of those things during the counting and certifying of the 2016 presidential election?
He did not. If there was not a senator to match a House member's objection, he moved on with the count.
Do you recall any candidate or colleague suggesting that Congress should ignore the Constitution and certify the election for the winner of the 2016 popular vote?
I don't recall that ever happening.
And did any person supporting any candidate for president, to your knowledge, attack the Capitol on January 6th, 2017?
That definitely did not happen on January 6th, 2017.
And are you aware of anyone ever attacking the Capitol during Congress's counting and certification of presidential electoral votes in the history of our country prior to January 6, 2021?
Certainly not in my lifetime and not any knowledge I have of the Congress's history.
I now want to turn to the 2020 election. Did you have any concerns in the weeks and months leading up to the 2020 presidential election about whether Mr. Trump would accept the results of the election if he lost?
I did, and that was the evening of the election when a statement was made by the president early in the morning, essentially, or not essentially, he was saying that the election was rigged, and then, and to be honest, prior to the election, the president would not honor reporter accept the outcome of the election if he lost. And then, of course, on the night of the election, he had said in his first public statement that he believed it was rigged. And then in the weeks after the media declared Joe Biden as the president-elect and the state certified the election outcomes and the lawsuits that the president has even brought had all been dismissed in the courts, the president ramped up his rhetoric in public appearances and on Twitter. And one that I recall was an invitation in mid-December via Twitter for people to come to the Capitol on January 6th, and stating in the tweet, "Will be wild."
You testified just there that there were legal challenges that you were aware of brought by Mr. Trump to the 2020 election. By December 14th, 2020, are you aware of what the status of those legal challenges was?
By December 14th, if I recall, is the date where the states were certifying their counts. Every challenge to the states counting and doing their certification had been dismissed or dropped by presidents.
Okay. Following the state's certification of electoral votes on December 14th, 2020, what was your understanding as to whether Mr. Trump had any further legal avenues to challenge the 2020 election?
In my understanding, was the next step in the process was the January 6th certification and then the January 20 inauguration for President-elect Biden. That was it. They had been exhausted.
Let's turn now to January 6th, 2021. What was your role in the counting and certification process on January 6th, 2021?
I was told the day before by Speaker Pelosi that she would like me to preside as the speaker designate at noon on January 6th to gavel us in, so to speak. And so the day starts, every congressional day starts with the speaker gaveling the Congress in. And so I gaveled us in, led us in pledge of allegiance. There was a new chaplain to the Congress, and asked the chaplain, as we do every opening session, asked the chaplain to lead us in prayer. And then I read an appointment of the tellers that each side, that each party, each chamber had designated to participate in the count on January 6th. And then I adjourned, and all of that lasted no more than 10 minutes.
I'm going to back you up just briefly. What did you do that morning before the certification process began?
I ran from the residence I have in Washington, D.C. to the Capitol and then back. It's a run I do often. And I recall on the run back from the Capitol, actually running up North Capitol, seeing dozens of individuals carrying signs that read "Stop the Steal" and wearing body armor and military fatigues. And I remember pulling down the cap that I was wearing. It was pretty cold, so kind of pulling it over my face because I didn't want to be seen by this crowd or recognized by this crowd. But it certainly just gave me an unsettling feeling about the direction the day was headed.
Did you watch any of Mr. Trump's speech on the ellipse that day?
I did. Once I returned to the Capitol, and after I opened the session, I was on the floor with my Democratic colleagues, and many of us had our phones out, and we were watching the speech on the floor. We would step off the floor into this area called a cloakroom, which is just footsteps from the floor, and there were televisions on in the cloakroom playing the speech from the president and his supporters at the ellipse.
And what was your reaction to that speech or the parts that you saw of it?
Well, in the weeks before January 6th, the president had fired up his supporters with claims that the election was rigged, said the 6th was going to be wild, and it came together on the 6th, just from what I saw of individuals on the streets of Washington, and then what I saw in the speech, it appeared that an angry mob had assembled around the Capitol and near the White House. And when the president said that his supporters must fight like hell and they won't have a country anymore, that worried me because we were undergoing the process certifying the election he lost. And when he aimed them at the Capitol by saying that he was in solidarity going to the Capitol with them, that we're going to go to the Capitol, a lot of us in the cloakroom looked at each other in a, oh God, what does this mean for us kind of feeling.
So how did the counting and certification of electoral votes on January 6, 2021 go?
So after I recessed, we took a break for about 50 minutes, and then Speaker Pelosi and Vice President Pence, as the President of the Senate, would next reconvene the House and the Senate in the House chamber. And as I said, it begins alphabetically. So on the Democratic side, because of COVID, only members of leadership and members from the states that were going to have to defend the vote were on the House floor. Any other Democrat would have to watch in the gallery. So there were no more than 24 or so of myself and others on the House floor. And I should have added at that time I was a member of House leadership. And so Arizona was, the first state to be challenged. And if I recall, Congressman Paul Gosar from Arizona challenged the Arizona vote. The Vice President asked if there was a senator who would co-sign the challenge, and I believe it was Senator Cruz from Texas who signed off. And so we adjourned the joint session, meaning the senators left to go to their own chamber for debate. We stayed in our chamber, and Speaker Pelosi took the gavel to kick off the debate on the matter of Arizona.
At some point thereafter, you learned that rioters had breached the Capitol, correct?
Myself and everyone around us on the floor had our phones out and were watching intently on what was happening around the Capitol. We were also receiving a number of Capitol Police alerts. There's an internal email system for members and staff, and the alerts were telling us about the mob that was assembling around the Capitol office buildings that were closed, suspected pipe bombs around the Capitol that had been discovered. And so we were focused on the debate, but also security posture, whether it was watching Twitter or receiving the Capitol police alerts, was also right in front of us in our handheld devices.
And about what time was this happening?
This was between 1 and 2 o'clock. As we watched either people who were in the mob and staged at the Capitol during the stage, or people who were at the ellipse and moved toward the Capitol after the speech.
What was the first thing that occurred that was unusual to you inside the Capitol?
Well, first I would say watching the mob on our devices below pass with force various security perimeters was unusual. I've never seen anything like that before. But also on the floor, Speaker Pelosi was presiding in the House chamber, and abruptly she was asked to step off the podium, and her security detail took her off the floor. And I also noticed Mr. Hoyer, who was the majority leader, Steny Hoyer of Maryland, and James Clyburn of South Carolina, who was the majority whip, also their details hurriedly went to them and took them off the floor.
And about what time was that?
This was in the 1 o'clock, let's say mid 1 o'clock hour. And at that point, James McGovern, who was a Rules Committee chairman from Massachusetts, he stepped up to the podium, and so it was a seamless transition. Debate did not stop. He stepped up to the podium and presided over the debate on the matter of Arizona.
After Speaker Pelosi and the other members of leadership that you mentioned were moved out of the chamber, You said debate continued for about how long did debate continue?
For probably another, no more than 30 more minutes. And it may have been even fewer.
What happened next in terms of safety recommendations?
Mr. McGovern suspended debate, and a Capitol Police officer went to the podium. I remember it being the lower podium, so that the podium where the speaker presides, there's two podiums in what's called the rostrum. The upper podium is where the speaker presides. That's where I got to sit, and that's where Speaker Pelosi and Pence presided. That's where McGovern presided. The lower podium, if you think about State of the Union, is where the president speaks. So a security officer went to that lower podium and told the members that there were people unauthorized inside the building, and that Capitol Police was dispersing tear gas, and that we were to reach under our seats and pull out a gas mask and be ready to put it on in case they had to disperse tear gas inside the chamber, and also be ready to move through an evacuation room.
Had you ever had to put a gas mask on in the Capitol House chamber before?
I didn't, until that moment, I did not know that there were gas masks under our seats, and we had also never before, rehearsed any kind of scenario. So first, there is just, I think people were surprised that they were even there. Sit up off them every day, we just didn't know.
Who were you sitting with at that time?
I had moved from sitting with Barbara Lee and Sherry Bustos early in the debate over to Congressman Ruben Gallego of Arizona. His wife had reached out to me. She was worried that Ruben would probably not follow orders of the Capitol Police, and that he would want to fight the mob or the protesters. And so she asked me if I could just look out for Ruben. And so I went over and sat with Ruben Gallego.
And what can you tell us about Congressman Gallego's training?
So I knew, and most of our colleagues knew, that Ruben had served a combat mission as a Marine in the Iraq War. And so as we were pulling out the gas masks, he saw immediately that I had no idea how to use or even open the gas mask. And so he started having women first throw him or toss him their gas masks. And he was ripping them open, sometimes using his teeth to rip them open, and was just handing out the gas masks and telling people to not breathe too quickly because that could lead you to pass out. He and I agreed that we would take off our coats so that our congressional pins were not obvious if they had to move to any of the rioters, and also so that we had more freedom of movement. He also handed me a pen that was sitting on the table where he was prepared to debate for Arizona, and he said to me as he handed the pen, he said, if any of them get near you, just put this in their neck.
So what was going through your mind at that moment?
A lot of uncertainty, disbelief that this was happening, that we were taking our coats off, that we were looking for weapons or how to use gas masks. At that point, as we're waiting for the security officer to give us further instructions, the chaplain who I had asked to lead us in the prayer earlier in the day went back up to the podium and uninvited, unannounced, just started reading from that lower podium a prayer, and she asked all of us if we would pray with her.
What, if anything, did you notice being done to secure the chamber at that time?
So after I and my colleagues prayed, I noticed that Capitol police officers were, along with some of my Republican members, Republican colleagues were pushing furniture against the back door. So if you think of it, again, the State of the Union is probably the best way to orient yourself. The door that the president walks through to the State of the Union, that's the back of the chamber. Those double doors have glass panes on them. And so furniture was being moved to block those doors because we could hear the pounding on those doors and the shouting of the rioters outside. In the front of the chamber where the rostrum is, where the podiums are, the speakers, there's two massive portraits. There's the portrait of George Washington, and that's on the Democratic side, and there's a portrait of General Lafayette, the French general from the Revolutionary War. That's on the Republican side. So on the Democratic side, right behind the portrait, is a set of double doors that takes you off the floor, and they're glass doors, so I could see through the glass doors in what's called a speaker's lobby that Capitol Police were stacking furniture and chairs against the doors that lead into the speaker's lobby. They were stacking them as high as they could stack them with what they had. We sat, as I said, and waited for instructions on the evacuation.
How would you characterize the group of people gathered outside the speaker's lobby and the House chamber at that time?
I could mostly just hear the sounds, the banging over the screen. I would not see that in the total.
And how would you characterize those sounds? What did it sound like?
It was haunting, and I say that because the chamber is mostly windowless, and so just having been alerted on our phones that suspected bombs were found around the building, and watching the violence against the police officers, and seeing that the mob had reached multiple perimeters and had come closer to the chamber, it was really just the uncertainty of what they wanted or what they would do.
How concerned were you for your personal safety at that moment?
It was escalating as we went from gas masks to a pen in my hand to a prayer from the chaplain. And it was when the chaplain read that prayer that I finally texted my wife, something I did not want to text her. I had essentially been telling her, we're going to be fine, it's okay, I didn't want to worry throughout the morning.
During the attack on the Capitol, were you following Mr. Trump's tweets?
I was. As I said, almost all of my colleagues, we had our phones out, and we were reading our phones and following the tweets and the ellipse speeches and listening to the video.
And why were you following his tweets?
We connected the president's tweets to our own safety in the chamber, and also the integrity of the proceedings that were taking place.
I'm going to ask for Exhibit 148 to be displayed, please. And, Your Honor, this exhibit has been stipulated by all sides. This is one of Mr. Trump's tweets.
Okay, are you offering it into evidence?
I am offering it into evidence, Exhibit 148, Your Honor. And this is a long exhibit, so we're only going to look at 2 tweets of the whole compilation. So this tweet is on page 83, and it has a timestamp of 2:24 p.m. on January 6th, 2021.
Okay, Exhibit 148 is submitted.
Congressman Swalwell, can you see the exhibit on your screen?
Yes, I see the tweet from the verified account.
And do you remember reading this tweet while you were in the chamber?
Yes, we received the timestamp request when I recall. The time that I recall being still on the floor, which is 2:24 p.m. on the 6th.
And how did you interpret this tweet? What did you interpret it to mean?
I interpreted that the president believed that the vice president was refusing to do something that could overturn the outcome the president wanted. But again, for my personal safety in the proceedings we were engaged in, the colleagues that I was with, we interpreted target had been painted on the Capitol, because that's where the vice president was when the tweet was sent.
And can you read the tweet, Congressman?
Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts, not the fraudulent or inaccurate ones which they were asked to previously certify. USA demands the truth! Exclamation.
Did you notice any change in what was happening outside the chamber after this tweet occurred, was sent?
Well, we didn't feel more safe. Like, it wasn't as if, the mob subsided. We were continuing to be updated by Captain Security that were trying to secure an evacuation map. We should stand ready. The pounding, the shouting continued.
Representative Swalwell, could you just speak up to you that
Sure.
You're starting to trail just a little bit?
Yeah, I'm happy to repeat that too. But
If you wouldn't mind.
sure. When the tweet was sent, we did not feel more safe. It wasn't as if the mob subsided. And so we waited, and this was near the point where we would ultimately leave the floor. But you could still hear the sounds of the pounding outside of the chamber and the screaming of
When, at some point, you were led out of the chamber, is that correct?
Yes,
And-
again, the security officer went to that lower podium and told us there was an evacuation route and that we were to go in the direction of the Lafayette portrait. Again, two sides. One is Washington, that's where they were stacking chairs. The other was the Lafayette portrait exit, and so we were told to go in that direction.
I think it's them. It is. But the whole WebEx went down. Sorry, Your Honor, small tech issue. Did the entire WebEx go down? Okay,
WebEx seems to still be on.
okay.
Congressman Swalwell, we're just having a technical problem.
No problem.
Okay. Should I wait?
Let's make it a minute.
Yeah.
If it doesn't get fixed in a minute, you can still hear it. So.
Okay.
because she says she can, so why don't we continue while they work on the technical issue?
Okay. Thank you, Your Honor. Congressman Swalwell, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I just can't hear him.
Oh, can you say something, Mr. Swalwell?
Yes, I'm unmuted now.
Okay.
It doesn't allow me on my end.
Okay.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, hopefully we'll be back to visual in just a moment. Did you play a role in the evacuation of the chamber?
Well, no, the brave police officers were the ones who asked us to leave. Being a rule follower, the son of a cop, I immediately started to follow the police officers as we were asked to leave. But I did see my colleague Ruben Gallego, who is not a rule follower, did not follow the orders of the police. And I saw that he was standing on House chairs, yelling at the members in the gallery that they were going to be okay, and just reminding them about their gas masks. And so I went back to the Washington side of the chamber, the Washington corporate side, and started yelling, Ruben, time to go, we gotta go. And was ultimately able to get Ruben to walk out of the chamber with him.
And what path did you take during the evacuation?
So we went out of the doors near the Lafayette portrait, which is the Republican side of the chamber. And there's a long hallway that those doors lead into. It's called the Speaker's Lobby. In a non-COVID time, that's where the press corps assembled and interviewed members. There were no press at the time because of COVID restrictions. And so I went out that door and then down the stairway that was just off that exit.
When you were starting to leave, did you notice that was there anybody still in the chamber?
There were still police officers in the chamber. And as I said, if I recall, there were one or two Republican colleagues who were standing at the double doors at the back of the chamber, helping push the furniture against the doors. But Gallego was one of the last ones on the floor, and so I had finally pulled him out. And as we were leaving, I looked down the long hallway of the Speaker's Lobby at where they had stacked the chairs and saw the mob pressed up against the glass doors that lead into the mall.
When you were leaving the chamber, were there any people left in the gallery?
Unfortunately, the gallery colleagues of mine were not able to leave at the same time that we were. I did look up at the gallery a number of times, especially when we were with Congressman Gallego was yelling at them. Many of them were lying under the chairs of the gallery. Some of them had their gas masks on. Some of them looked like they were in kind of like a prayer group, praying together. But the Capitol Police, later learned the impeachment, have not yet secured the exit for the third floor doors.
Okay. And what was your reaction to seeing those members and staff in the gallery?
Horrified. We felt helpless that the police were not able to get them out, and frankly felt guilt that I was able to leave and they were still up there.
You testified a moment ago that the path you took led you through the Speaker's Lobby. How long did you stay in the Speaker's Lobby?
We were encouraged to move as quickly as we could, but I learned you can only move as fast as the people in front of you, and with hundreds of members leaving the floor, there were fits and starts, and so we would move and we would stop and cluster. and the evacuation route would last, I recall, well over 10 to 15 minutes to get us in.
Did you hear anything as you exited the chamber?
As I was leaving the chamber and going through the speaker's lobby, I did hear what sounded like a gunshot. I did not see it, and I was in the mix of members who were trying to move as fast as we could to follow.
And when did you ultimately make it to a safe location?
It took, as I said, at least 10 to 15 minutes, and so I would say sometime just before 3 o'clock or near 3 o'clock.
Who else from Congress did you meet up with there?
House leadership had been taken off the floor when Speaker Pelosi was taken off the floor. So anyone who remained on the floor was members of Democratic leadership, members from states that were defending their vote, and then most of my Republican colleagues. It didn't appear that they had the same COVID restrictions that we had on our side. And so that was the group that moved together off the floor. Eventually, in the evacuation room, our colleagues from the gallery would join us, members of the press corps would join us, and then members of leadership staff who worked in offices in the Capitol would join us.
Once you were in that location, were you receiving updates as to what was going on in the Capitol and outside?
The Sergeant of Arms, who is the individual charged with House security, moved with us and was in the room where we arrived. And so he routinely gave us updates, and frankly, like being on a delayed flight with the captain, told the same thing every 15 minutes, which was that the Capitol was under attack. They were trying to get more resources to clear the Capitol, but we would have to stay there until the Capitol was cleared. And that was every 15 to 20 minutes.
Was there communication in that location between you and your colleagues about what was happening outside?
Certainly, yes. It was Republicans and Democrats, in the same room. And at one point, I do recall that the Sergeant of Arms had kind of loosely implied that they may be bringing buses to the site, and that we would leave in buses. And I was seated next to, for most of the time, next to Congressman Adam Schiff. And I do remember Mr. Schiff vocalizing that we should not leave, we should stay, and that essentially the worst thing we could do, if there's an attempted coup taking place, is to leave the site of the coup, that we needed to go back to the Capitol and finish the count.
I'm going to now show.
I also recall, sorry,
Nope.
Ruben Gallego also, because I remember asking Gallego should we consider the buses, and Gallego was adamant that I remember the phrase that we would be sitting ducks if we got on the bus and left. That would be the worst thing for us, for our personal safety.
At some point that afternoon, are you aware that Mr. Trump made a statement?
Yes, and I remember multiple statements and a video, but yes.
And I'm going to have Mr. Heim bring up exhibit number P68. Your Honor, this is also a stipulated exhibit.
16 submitted.
And do you remember seeing this video, Congressman Swalwell?
Yes, I do.
Can you play the video, Mr. Heim? It indicates there's an issue with the WebEx audio.
Mr. Trudy, how much longer do you have with them? I know you're maybe we should break for lunch and people can figure out the technology.
I've probably got about another 10 or 15 minutes.
I mean, I was hoping to get through direct before lunch, but I'm worried that the technology issue might take some figuring out.
Okay, that's fine, Your Honor.
And it may be that it's not possible to play the video over WebEx with sound, so hopefully your tech people can talk to the court's tech people and we'll figure something out.
I can also have the video played locally for Congressman Swalwell because everybody here can see the video, I think. So maybe that's an option too.
Okay, why don't we figure that out, because I'd like to see the video.
Okay, yeah. And it's only 1 minute. It's a short
Okay.
video.
Let's take a break. We will reconvene at 1:15, and hopefully somebody on your team can